Please welcome Director, Data Science, Microsoft Research, Vani Mandava.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to these last two sessions of Faculty Summit 2018. So in 2017, 57% of professional occupations in the United States were held by women, yet only 17% of Fortune 500 CIOs positions were held by women. In computing specifically, only 26% of jobs were held by women. The numbers are even lower for underrepresented groups. Black and Hispanic men, for example, hold only 9% of computing jobs, and the numbers for Black and Hispanic women are an abysmal 4%. As a result, the technical products and services that we use today have been created by a single large homogeneous group of people, men. Considering the impact that technology has on our economy, our society, and our lives, it makes sense to pause and consider the question, what if women and other groups underrepresented in technology were at the table designing and creating technology alongside men? This panel of computing innovators will explore the exciting outcomes that are possible if diverse perspectives were brought to the table. It is my pleasure to introduce Lucy Sanders, our esteemed moderator for this distinguished panel. Lucy Sanders is CEO and co-founder of the National Center for Women and Information Technology, NCWIT. Lucy has extensive industry background, having worked in R&D in executive VP positions at AT&T Labs, Bell Labs, and Avaya Labs for over 20 years. Lucy specialized in systems-level software and solutions and also holds 6 patents in the area of communications technology. Lucy is the recipient of the very prestigious Bell Labs Fellow Award, which is the highest technical accomplishment bestowed at the company. Lucy currently serves as a trustee for the Colorado School of Mines, the Center for American Entrepreneurship in Washington, D.C., and the International Computer Science Institute at the University of California, Berkeley. She has served on the Information Technology Research and Development Ecosystem Commission for the National Academies and the Innovation Advisory Board for the U.S. Department of Commerce. On behalf of Microsoft, it is a great honor to welcome Lucy Sanders and our distinguished panel for this session.
Well, thanks, Vani, for that really great welcome. And welcome to Jim and Margaret and Abalati for coming today and sharing some insights around diversity and innovation. As a community, those of us in computing, and all of us are, I think, in this room, we talk about broadening participation in computing quite a bit when we get together. And often we'll talk about it as a pipeline issue. We need to focus on the computing educational pipeline. And that's true, we do. That's a very important thing. Or we'll talk about it as being the right thing to do. Well-paying jobs for a diverse group of people, a workforce issue, and those are all true as well. But today, we're not going to talk about any of those important things. We're going to talk today about the link between innovation and diversity. It's often a conversation we don't stop and have, and when you think about it, it's the real reason why we're in this game. It's not just a numbers game. We want to see what great creative ideas would come to the table when diverse populations are there. So the link between innovation and diversity, between creativity and diversity, between great research outcomes and diversity, all really important things that this panel will explore. Everybody on the panel today is a noted innovator in his or her own right, and also somebody who cares deeply about diversity and inclusion, or my favorite new word, belonging, you know, where you are working and where you are studying. So it's a super important topic because we know from research, and Vani mentioned some of this in her opening remarks, that diverse teams solve complex problems faster and they get to a better answer. They are also have higher collective intelligence in problem solving as well. It's very important that these diverse teams be very well managed, because homogeneous teams are often easier to manage, but they don't necessarily get to the most innovative outcome. So it's important that they be really well managed as well. So I know these are things we all care about, and our panelists care about it too. So we're going to start the questioning with a little bit of storytelling here. Because I think it's important to establish this link from their broad perspective as innovators about the links they've seen between technical innovation and diversity. So I'm going to ask each one. We'll go first to Margaret. Thank you, Margaret. To talk about a technical project or team they were involved in that had particularly innovative results. So the link between innovation and diversity. So Margaret, tell us about your story. And we're going to geek out. So we're going to really be talking about technology and really geek out here. So go ahead, Margaret.
Sure, thanks. So it's wonderful to be here. I guess rather than think about sort of one zoomed in, I'm going to talk about sort of an overall culture that's been in my research group over the 25 years now, nearly, that I've been at Princeton. And that is about projects that are interdisciplinary. So there's a diversity of topic, a diversity of skill sets that come in, and then a diversity of backgrounds and genders and so forth as well. So about a little over 15 years ago, I started a project called ZebraNet that was basically started because I, a computer systems person who cared about power efficiency, got coupled with one of my biology colleagues from across campus who wanted better wildlife tracking devices. And we worked across that intellectual gap to come up with designs that sort of abided by their needs and their desires to get better fine-grained tracking of zebras, and abided by sort of the engineering constraints of the problem, which was very tough power constraints and GPS limitations and so forth. Coupled in all of that was a diversity of people as well, because you bring in people with conservation experience, you bring in people with deep engineering experience, male, female, different parts of the stack. And I think it was a very fertile place to have group meetings, because you'd have to explain things carefully across those lines, which makes you a better communicator. But you also come up with interesting research ideas that lie in the interstices between different topic areas.
I think it's the first time I've heard diversity being different parts of the stack. It was pretty fun, Margaret. Jim, what about you? Tell us your story.
Okay. Well, before I say a story, I have to set the stage for the story,
Okay,
right? I think
course.
something that we're seeing in computing now is sort of a move from computing being tools to computing being partners with people. At the National Science Foundation, where I'm working right now, we talk about the human technology frontier. And we talk about technology, that really means computing. Maybe we shouldn't say that to everybody across the National Science Foundation, but that's what we think about. And when we think about the human technology frontier, it's all of humanity. So in a sense, I take it to be really axiomatic that if we're building tools that we're going to partner with as humans, that it's got to be for all of humanity. So it's axiomatic that we want to embrace and engage across all different aspects of diversity, whether it be cultural, socioeconomic, gender, however you measure it. So my story, my favorite project I worked on, actually it was all the way up and down the stack also. When at the University of Massachusetts, we had a project on collaborative adaptive sensing of the atmosphere. It was about the system concept was this dense network of low-powered radars that would sense hazardous weather and predict and do early warning and detection of hazardous weather and then do warning out to folks. And to me, that's sort of a quintessential socio-technical smack dab at the human technology frontier. And it was diverse. So yes, it went all the way up and down the stack, all the way from designing waveforms to deciding when to issue warnings to people. It was also diverse in the backgrounds of people who were there. We had meteorologists, we had computer scientists. That was me in terms of the leadership. Meteorologists, computer scientists, atmospheric scientists, sociologists, electrical engineers, all working side by side. We had, an Asian American, that was me, an Indian American. We had a Latino, an African American, and two white males in our leadership team. And so I think we just had incredible diversity in that. And I think of all of the projects that I've worked on, to me that was the most rewarding because of all of the diverse viewpoints we had to bring to solve that end-to-end system, all the way from designing radar forms all the way up to doing notifications.
So interdisciplinary also seems to be coming out in this conversation as well. So Abladi, tell us your story.
I also have an interdisciplinary story.
There's a theme here. Yeah.
And so we see, I think, the things that you shared, Jim, and Margaret, really resonated. The project that I'm thinking about is Project Rome, which was an effort that we started to really rethink how you interact with your computer in a world where you don't just have one, where you have several. You're doing things on your mobile device, you're doing things maybe on a laptop, maybe you have a workstation where you do other things. And as we got started on this project, one of the first things that we did is we assembled a team of folks from marketing, folks from user experience design, folks like me who are plumbers who understand the operating system and communications. And we started by trying to tell the story. And what we found was that by trying to tell the story first, that multidisciplinary approach, we picked the problems that we wanted to solve, in a much better way, and we were able to focus. Some of you may have seen, like we launched a feature recently called Your Phone that lets you link your phone and PC and use them seamlessly, get messages on your PC, see photos, on your PC from your phone. That in a lot of ways is the culmination of a journey that started from taking a slightly different approach. Traditionally, in the operating system, we would start with the technology, and then we would go looking for the problem. And in this case, I think it was eye-opening. How much of a difference it made in the final result. Just assembling a different set of perspectives at an early phase, and going after a problem.
Excuse me. So it's so interesting. I love operating systems too. I'd rather just do operating systems, let the problems find me, that's more fun. Just a joke. Anyway, so when I was at Bell Labs in the early 90s, I did a project. It was a multimedia communications server enterprise. It was a mashup between Skype and Google Docs, in 1993. And the team was hugely diverse. Racial diversity, gender diversity, all kinds of ethnicities on this team. And it was really that project that kind of got me thinking about it. I was a little bit of a slow learner. Like, wait a minute, wow, this is awesome. All these different kinds of people. Bell Labs had great diversity, and a lot of that came because we hired really smart thinkers, mathematicians, scientists, and they learned how to create hardware and software. So it was very diverse. It was a really interesting project. And unfortunately, not all teams are this way, we know, from our stats. And I'm going to give you a few stats just to kind of put a little foundational grounding under this. That I'm going to give you some stats that are about gender, but I also want to reinforce again, we need stats on all groups' participation. There are a number of historically marginalized groups in computing. In this particular case, in these case studies I'm about ready to tell you, the process, we could really only look at gender. But they're innovation metrics different than participation metrics, which makes them different than the ones we normally look at. So this is really around more meaningful participation in computing. So NCWIT runs a patenting study. We update it every couple years. We crawl the US patent database with gender matching software, and we assign a gender to every inventor on every IT patent, and then we look at the results. And IT is the government's definition of IT, so it's all things computing. It's everything in the computing community. And the end result over the last 30 years, 88% of all patents have male-only invention teams, or that's one or more men. 2% have female-only invention teams, and the rest are mixed. So of course, patenting is only one innovation metric. So we did the same thing on the ACM paper database for papers accepted to ACM conferences, and we did the same type of thing. The N of over 600,000, it was a pretty big N, and about 78% of all authors on accepted papers to ACM, about 78% are male, and the rest are female, 22%. Now that number is not you'd like it to be higher, let's just face it, right? But it's not so bad when you consider women's participation as computing faculty in research institutions. It tracks about what you would expect. But the real thing on this particular study was the sub-segregation of papers between women and men. Women were mostly in documentation, human-computer interface, not systems, not networking, not algorithms. So a huge sub-segregation. Real quickly, just to let you know, overall participation numbers, women make up about 13% of all hardware developers and about 18% of all software developers. So I think it's pretty safe to say with numbers like these and others that we're missing out on a large set of creative ideas from over half the population when it comes to innovation and research in the areas we care about. So that's like a huge untapped potential that if we could just figure out what to do here, there's an innovation gap and a huge upside potential if we solve it. So my second question is going to be, if I get to it, here we go. As panelists and as innovators yourself, what do you think? Why do you think it's critical to close this innovation gap? You've hinted at some of that in the answers to your first questions. Why do you think it's critical to close this? And why do you think we have this? Why do you think it's happening? I'm going first, Abalati.
All right.
Yeah.
The word that comes to mind to me when I think about the importance of diversity in innovation is robustness. If you think about an idea sort of as a living thing, like its survivability, depends heavily, on its composition at birth. And ideas that come out of diverse teams, ideas that reflect at birth, a set of diverse perspectives, not just, a coder's perspective on what algorithm he can write, but say a marketing person's perspective on what things matter, to end users, a human-computer interaction specialist, perspective, on what is usable, a man's perspective, a woman's perspective, an African's perspective, various backgrounds, when all of those are present, at the birth of an idea, it's the likelihood that it will not die on the way to adulthood is much higher. And I think that metaphor is helpful because really I think what we care about not just is innovation, but innovation that has impact. And innovation that has impact, has the characteristic, to me at least, that there are things that have been thought through and incorporated at every stage along the way that really can only get in there, that can only really be woven in, if you have a set of diverse perspectives that reflect the world in which that idea is going to actually exist. There was another question.
I know, it was a double-barreled question, which is really unfair. So the second part of the question was, why do you think we have this gap?
Why do I think it's familiarity. I think that the easiest thing to do is what you tend to see the most of. And I think it takes real effort, to apply a multidisciplinary approach. I think it takes real effort to, number one, identify a lack of diversity, and then number two, correct it. You have to be intentional about it. And I think that without the right mindset, and without the right framework, around optimizing for, diversity in our approach, I think the default behaviors tend to dominate.
So I might answer the second question first by how did we get here? I think it ties back to this notion of the human technology frontier and a shift from computing, focusing more on computing and databases and operating system networks as artifacts, and more now towards computing, partnering with humans, and more on the application side. And I think we were able to maybe slide by without the diversity, as much diversity before, because it was more looking at artifacts. Now, if we're building technologies that are going to partner with humans, there's just absolutely no way we can get by without that diversity of perspectives.
I think that's a really good point. Margaret, what do you think?
I wanted to zoom in on a particular part of the timeline, which is sort of the time from late in a PhD onwards into one's career. And I want to zoom in particular on the systems research community writ large. And I want to say that it is really easy to think about the numbers that we have in our undergrad programs, which thankfully are coming back up again. Actually, First thing is, concrete example, I represent the peak year in terms of percentage production of women CS bachelor's degrees in America. I'm 53 years old. The peak was 1986. We came back down for many, many years, and now we're coming back up. So first of all, there's this notion that the pipeline will save us, but the pipeline was draining. And second of all, the other part of it is that PhD production has hung in there at around 15 to 20% women for many years because we refill internationally, even though our US numbers undergrad have fluctuated. So you look in that later part of the career and you say, we could have been sort of sustaining about 20% participation in our systems research community. But if you look at the ACM SIG membership numbers, of the SIGs that we represent in this room, SIG Ops, SIG Plan, and SIG Com have less than 5% women membership. SIG Arc comes in, that's my SIG, at around 8%. And kudos to SIG Mobile, which tops out just above 10%. So something's happening in how we're cultivating the second part of a person's career. Like, we get them to the point of getting a PhD, but do we cultivate what sustains them longer term than that? That's not as clear to me that we are doing as much in the way of long-term mentoring and long-term appreciation. And I think a first step is, as systems researchers, we measure what we care about. So we should be measuring more of this data in an ongoing way. We should get it for underrepresented groups so that we can see at a conference how many of the first authors presenting the paper were women or underrepresented minorities. It's often very small, and it's very hard to know. So I think better data tracking used to motivate better mentorship and sustained career development would be great.
And you're touching some on culture. So we, again, to really not focus on the educational pipeline, but what happens after, I can say a bit about the workforce, the corporate workforce. One of the biggest things that we hear there, unhospitable culture, when you start to really, sort of dig into that, you find out that, for example, women tend to be more in the support roles that support the creative endeavors of innovators. So they would be in project management, system verification, customer requirements. Very important things, by the way, don't get me wrong, super important, but they're not the things that would lead generally to a promotion up the technical ladder. So what happens then, like to be a CTO or an architect or a distinguished engineer, they just don't lead there, generally speaking. So by mid-career, they get sort of frustrated and they leave. So they're not even at the stage of their career yet where they could be innovators. They don't have the task assignments. So when you drill down into that, a lot of supervisors, technical supervisors, really have no idea how they assign roles, tasks, assignments, et cetera. So those are the kinds of things we have to really start being curious about. And all of the people in this room are analytical. You all have a great spirit of inquiry. If we start really getting the data and digging into it and being curious about it, as Margaret is saying, and look for some of the ways we can take bias out of some of these systems, I think the gap will close. But we have to really be curious and analytical about it, just in the same way you are around cloud computing or, anything else. So that's what we see in the workforce, and I suspect it's somewhat true in academia as well. Would anybody want to comment on what the culture is like for young researchers or old researchers who are new PhDs in academia?
So I'm a lifelong, unapologetic academic. I love it. I think it's the best job in the world. And frankly, I think we do an okay job in many ways of cultivating our young faculty members. I sometimes worry that we don't explicitly say how much fun we're having. I try to explicitly say how much fun I'm having because I think people need to see that. You want to engage in a path that A, shows impact, and B, looks enjoyable. And so I try to model that more explicitly myself. And I think in academia, there are flexibilities to the way you operate groups and the way you sort of manage your time that are incredibly compelling. And getting the word out about that is
super important.
Super important.
So Jim, what is NSF doing in this space? You're well known for broadening participation.
Let me answer the NSF question, but I will say that, like Margaret, I'm a lifelong academic and absolutely love it. And many of the challenges that I think we face with diversity in computing are faced really across the university, and that my sense is that universities are becoming more attuned to that and more flexible in hiring and tenure processes, and so I see some light at the end of the tunnel there. Let me put on my NSF hat and say a couple words about NSF. So there's a long history. Well, 10 years, I suppose, is not that long, but certainly a recent and really storied history of activities here in broadening participation in computing. There are the BPC alliances like NCWIT, like CRAW, Access Computing, Kashi, and others, and these have been ongoing activities for 10 years that I just think have been absolutely fabulous. There are mentoring programs, so Margaret mentioned the importance of mentoring at the undergraduate level, career mentoring, grad women's cohort, so projects and activities like that. We're not talking much about the pipeline, but I can't help but mention computer science for all, and we like to really say for all to emphasize the equity and the access to a rigorous and really compelling computer science education in K through 12, and that's an activity that I think we're really, really proud of. One of the things that's happened there, in addition to the ECS computing that folks may have heard about, the Computer Science Principles, a second AP exam, was offered the first time in 2017. 50,000 students took it. Between 2017 and 2016, the number of students taking the AP exam, either of the AP exams in computer science, more than doubled. The number of women more than doubled. The number of Hispanic students more than doubled. The number of African American students. So I think that speaks really well for the pipeline. I will tell you, since many of you are academics here, the challenge is going to be when those students show up on our academic doorsteps, are we going to have programs that welcome them and the kinds of computing that they want to do? I see that as a challenge. I think one of the, as wonderful as those are, sometimes it's too easy to sit here and say, oh, look at all those great things that are going on. The Lucy Sanders of the world will take care of BPC for us, right? And they do wonderful things, but it's a challenge for all of us, I think. And looking out here, really all of us here have a responsibility and a need to address that. And so a new program actually that we're sort of piloting at the National Science Foundation. I know many people here don't read the Dear Colleague letters that I write, but you should read Dear Colleague Letter 17110 on engaging in meaningful broadening participation activities. And what we're trying to do here is to make this what we NSF are trying to do here. We've piloted this in the very large grants. We're going to pilot it next year in some of the select mediums and large grants. The idea here is that everybody who's funded under an NSF grant should take part in some kind of meaningful BPC activity. It doesn't mean you have to go out and start the next NCWIT or CRAW, but there's something that every one of us can do to help broaden participation in computing. Many of the ones that Margaret just mentioned, for example. And so, we're really very excited about that. And so, if I could leave you with one thought, I've been a teacher for 32 years, I guess. If you walk away with one thing, here's one thing to walk away. Read Dear Colleague Letter 17110, or send me an email and I'll send it to you.
That's great. What's the number again?
17110.
Okay.
If we had rehearsed this, we'd have the number show up there on the slide.
We should put it on the announcements tab of the Microsoft, research faculty research site. That'd be great. I want to just throw in sort of one question before I ask the final question, because I don't want to leave the panel without maybe asking for a few observations on what the researchers would call intersectionality, the notion that we all identify in different ways and multiple ways. That in fact, I could be a white woman from the South, or I could be a black man from New York City, or all kinds of different intersecting identities. And so we don't want to leave you with the notion that there's like a shopping list of things you can do for broadening participation that have to be very thoughtfully done. So anybody, I didn't, any thoughts on this? Or I think it's a super important topic to just make sure people know that word intersectionality and how we can't just assume all women are the same, or all blacks are the same, or all Latinas are the same.
So I guess I would again stress that, as Lucy just said, it shouldn't be a checklist, that you should find something that you want to do, and actually engaging in existing structures and what people will call scaffolding. So maybe there is a CSTA that you can engage with, or maybe your department or your college is doing something that you can engage in, and it's not like you have to go out and do a checklist, I better go do X. Find something that's meaningful for you that you can relate to, because that's the kind of contribution that will make a difference to people who are on the receiving end of that contribution.
Any thoughts on that one?
I guess I would add, when I'm running a research group, one of the things I try to be aware of is having enough diversity along many dimensions that everybody in the end can just be themselves. It doesn't feel like a dominant group and an outsider.
Super important.
And in the process, you end up with, a weightlifter who happens to be female and a kind of quiet Harry Potter male, and sort of everything. Everyone's allowed to be individuals because there isn't sort of a dominant culture and a recessive or outsider's feeling.
Again, returning to the word belonging, I think that's everybody wants to belong and contribute and do the best work of their lives. So it's super important. So let's do one last question to each panelist, with starting with Abalati. One idea, Jim already gave us his, so you get another one.
Oh, wow. I thought I wasn't going to get one.
Yeah. Or you could repeat the same one if you really want to emphasize that. One idea that you can take out of this room today and do immediately that doesn't cost much money for broadening participation as it relates to innovation and diversity. Again, I think I really want to come back and hit that. That where we have the biggest gap in many ways, the pipelines is some sense filling, right? We're starting to see more of these students arrive. We want them then in their research careers or in their corporate careers to be able to innovate and to create and to bring their best life experiences to the table and do really great technology work. So what would be one thing that you could leave people with that they could do?
Can I say two things?
Yes, just like Jim. You want to be just like Jim?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So the two things for me really are be an advocate and set an example. We have an internal conference here at Microsoft called WIPS. It's by invitation only. It's our top technical conference. And I remember there a few years ago, Galen Hunt, whom some of you may know, stood up at WIPS during the session for poster talks, and he said, look around the room. And everyone looked around the room, and he said, there aren't very many women here, and I think that's a problem. And so what I would like you to do, is the next time you want to invite me to WIPS, take my invitation, and give it to one of our women engineers instead. And he sat down. And I thought that was really great. I think that it's all of us have the ability to affect decisions that are made, daily in our context, in a positive direction. And it's a tool that is relatively cheap for us to exercise. And so that's the first thing that I would leave folks with is, look at, conference selection, settings, paper selection, and just be an advocate. The second one is set an example. And what I mean by that is that when you're assembling a team, along the lines that Margaret, mentioned, be intentional, about looking at the set of people that you have around you and asking, am I defaulting to the same choices? Are there people whom I'm not even considering? Is the set of perspectives that I have actually diverse? And the reason to do that, is because the statistics that we're looking at, they don't come out of a vacuum. They actually come out of the set of people, who are in this room writ large. And the way in which those statistics change, is that all of us, exercise back pressure against our default tendencies.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
I guess I have to do two now, too.
The pressure's on.
I like to keep up.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So one that's super cheap and it just requires you to remember is I think we lose track of how much students and people junior to us respond to even modest, tiny bits of feedback. And so the quick email at the end of the class or after a midterm that says, you would be great if you continued on in this field. Or you would be great if you considered grad school. It's a 10-word email. and it will make a difference in someone's life often. Even if they don't do what you think they'd be great at, they heard it, I guarantee. That's one. The second thing is that by virtue of who we are fairly senior, and so we're more often in the position of being allies to things that are going on than are sort of being in the sort of picked on situations ourselves these days. And so I would encourage you to sort of look at the world with your ally hat on and remember to say things like, I didn't find that funny, we don't do that here. You don't have to be completely humorless, but you can be the grown-up in the room that just sort of raises the bar. Don't wait for the picked on person to have to say it themselves. I think those would be my two.
Very important. All right, Jim, you only get one.
Wow, those are really good answers. And actually, I note that it's all about people and the connection, the individual connections. And I think when I was listening to Abdullah, I thought, oh, that's exactly my answer. So my answer is the same as his. I'd use two different words, and that would be a mentor and be a role model, right? And as Margaret said, just reaching out to somebody and talking to them and helping. And that could be a student, it could be a colleague, it could be a staff member, it could be lots of different people. That personal touch really makes a huge difference, and to be a role model as well. And I think people, as Margaret said, many people here are senior. People look to us and how we behave, and I think that's really important. And there are lots of different ways to be a role model. And being a mentor and being a role model is absolutely no cost at all.
So I guess I get two. I'll take two. One would be this sounds like a really simple one, but you'd be surprised how often it's not done. Use the spirit of inquiry that we all have to challenge things in a nice way. So it's sort of like a question. So when somebody says, I don't think Lucy's qualified for that award, spirit of inquiry, you say, well, what makes you think that? Or I don't think, that Abdullah is a natural born leader. Well, what's that mean anyway? Right? What do you mean by that? One more question. Not to say, oh, you're wrong, or, argue. That can come later, right? But just a question in that learning moment to find out, what do they mean? Because we say things all the time and we have no idea what they mean. And it's a learning moment for both people, because it could be that Lucy's not a natural born leader, right? I mean, that might well be. By the way, I don't think there is anything as a natural born leader, but anyway. So the spirit of inquiry is underrated, and all of us are researchers and innovators, and we know how to do that, and it's just a question. It's the same kind of question you would ask technically. Why do you think that works? Or whatever. So the spirit of inquiry, I think, is super important. And the other thing I want to say is you don't have to do this alone. There are a lot of free resources and programs out there. There's some programs that cost a little money, but lots of ways to be involved. NCWIT has them, CRAW has them, ACMW has programs. There are a lot of great programs out there to give you research-based information. So that's kind of the last idea here is go become informed. This is not a heavy lift for all of you smart people. To go and become informed about what social science research says about underrepresentation, and then you're going to be well equipped to use your spirit of inquiry. If you don't know what unconscious bias means from a research perspective, stereotype, threat, civility, collective intelligence, intersectionality, they're like 10 words. You can find out very easily, and then you'll be very well equipped to base your actions on research. So. Those are sort of our ideas, and I think we've got a few minutes for questions, Q&A, if people have any questions from the audience. I see somebody with their hand up there. Wait a minute, someone's coming to you, I believe.
Thank you all for your comments. The one thing that I didn't hear talked about was diversity and inclusion with respect to disability, and I was wondering if you would just take a minute to address that and how we can aid in D&I for disability.
Well, first of all, right down the road at UW, Richard Ladner runs Access Computing.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to say more about that?
So I will just say one of the 7 BPC activities is Access Computing, which really aims specifically at exactly that. And as Lucy mentioned, that's been led for quite a long time by Richard Ladner, an amazing guy at UW.
The other thing I'll say too is we just discovered a gap in working with Richard and a researcher, Maya Israel, who looks a lot at universal design, and have discovered a pretty big gap right now in terms of computing curriculum and and universal design for students with learning disabilities. So Richard works quite a bit on physical disabilities, and he's starting to look at learning disabilities, and so that's kind of a thing to think about, like how could we possibly create curriculum, homework assignments, et cetera, that enable students with different learning disabilities to succeed in our classrooms.
And I'll just add, so CRAW has for over 15 years offered a grad cohort for women. But a year ago, we offered the first URMD grad cohort, which was a co-ed grad cohort for underrepresented minorities and people with disabilities. And we just set the date and the place. It's going to be March. Keep an eye out. March 2019 will be the second of those URMD grad cohorts.
Mm-hmm.
So now I may have understood your question or comment a little bit differently. The way I understood it in connection with the diversity and its impact on innovation is bringing in people with different abilities, into the creative process, and into the idea generation and the innovation process. And I think it's absolutely key. For the same reasons that we've talked about, that what you get at the end, is sort of born accessible. It's born with multiple perspectives. It's born with the ability to function and be useful for a broader range of people in a broader range of contexts. And so I think thank you so much for bringing that up.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have a question? We do it? Well, all right. So thank you, panelists. Let's thank our panelists for yay. For yay. All right. Well, thank you all.